I did not see Elliot till he came to London toward the end of June the following year. I asked him whether Larry had after all gone to Paris. He had. I was faintly amused at Elliot's exasperation with him. I had a kind of sneaking sympathy for the boy. I couldn't blame him for wanting to spend a couple years in Paris, and I was prepared to launch him. I told him to let me know the moment he arrived, but it was only when Louisa wrote and told me that he was there that I knew he'd come. I wrote to him, care of the American Express, which was the only address she gave me, and asked him to come to dine to meet some of the people I thought he ought to know. I thought I'd try him out first with the Franco-American set, Emily de Montador and Grace de Chateau-Guillard, and so on. And do you know what he answered? He said he was sorry he couldn't come, but he hadn't brought any evening clothes with him. Elliot looked at me full in the face to see the stupefaction with which he expected this communication to fill me. He raised a superstitious eyebrow, and he observed that I took it with calm. He replied to my letter on a sheet of nasty paper with a heading of a cafe in the Latin Quarter, and when I wrote back, I asked him to let me know where he was staying. I felt I must do something about him for Isabel's sake, and I thought perhaps he was shy. I mean, I couldn't believe that any young fellow in his senses could come to Paris without evening clothes, and in any case, there are tolerable tailors there. So I asked him to lunch and said it would be quite a small party. And would you believe it? Not only did he ignore my request to give me some other address than the American Express, but he said he never ate luncheon. That finished him as far as I was concerned. I wonder what he's been doing with himself. I don't know, and to tell you the truth, I don't care. I'm afraid he's a thoroughly undesirable young man, and I think it would be a great mistake for Isabel to marry him. After all, if he led a normal sort of life, I'd have run across him at the Ritz or Foucault or somewhere. I'd go sometimes to these fashionable places myself, but I'd go others also. And it happened that I spent several days in Paris early in the autumn of that year on my way to Marseilles, where I was proposing to take one of the massager ships for Singapore. I dined one evening with the French Montparnasse, and after dinner we went to the Dome to drink a glass of beer. Presently, my wandering eye caught sight of Larry sitting by himself at a little marble-top table on a crowded terrace. He was looking idly at the people who strolled up and down, enjoying the coolness of the night after a sultry day. I left my party and went up to him. His face lit up when he saw me, and he gave me an engaging smile. He asked me to sit down, but I said I couldn't, as I was with a party. I just wanted to say, "How do you do?" I said. "Are you staying here?" he asked. "Only for a few days." "Will you lunch with me tomorrow?" "I thought you never lunched." He chuckled. "You've seen Elliot." "I don't generally. I can't afford the time. I just have a glass of milk and a brioche, but I'd like you to lunch with me." "All right." We arranged to meet at the Dome the next day to have an aperitif and eat at some place on the boulevard. I rejoined my friends. We sat on talking. When next I looked for Larry, he had gone. I spent the next morning very pleasantly. I went to the Luxembourg and passed an hour looking at some pictures I liked. Then I strolled in the gardens, recapturing the memories of my youth. Nothing had changed. They might have been the same students who walked along the gravel paths in pairs, eagerly discussing the writers who excited them. They might have been the same children who trundled the same hoops under the watchful eye of the same nurses. They might have been the same old men who basked in the sunshine, reading the morning paper. They might have been the same middle-aged woman in mourning who sat on the free benches and gossiped with one another about the price of food and misdeeds of servants. Then I went to the Odeon and looked at the new books in the galleries, and I saw the lads who, like myself 30 years before, were trying under the petulant eye of the smock-frocked attendants to read as much as they could of the books they could not afford to buy. Then I strolled leisurely along those dear, dingy streets till I came to the Boulevard de Montparnasse, and so in the Dome. Larry was waiting. We had a drink and walked along to a restaurant where he could lunch in the open air. He was perhaps a little paler than I remembered him, and this made his very dark eyes in their deep sockets more striking. But he had the same self-possession, curious and one so young, and the same ingenuous smile. When he ordered his lunch, I noticed that he spoke French fluently and with a good accent. I congratulated him on it. I knew a certain amount of French before, you know, he explained. Aunt Louisa had a French governess for Isabel, and when they were at Maugham, she used to make us talk French with her all the time. I asked him how he liked Paris. "Oh, very much. Do you live in Montparnasse?" "Yes," he said, after a moment's hesitation, which I interpreted into a disinclination to tell exactly where he lived. Elliot was rather put out that the only address you gave was the American Express. Larry smiled but did not answer. "What do you do with yourself all the time?" "I loaf." "And you read?" "Yes, I read." "Do you ever hear from Isabel?" "Sometimes. We're neither of us great letter writers. She's having a grand time in Chicago. They're coming over next year to stay with Elliot." "That'll be nice for you." "I don't believe Isabel's ever been to Paris. It'll be fun taking her around." He was curious to know about my journey in China and listened attentively to what I told him, but when I tried to get him to talk about himself, I failed. He was so uncommunicative that I was forced to the conclusion that he had asked me to lunch with him merely to enjoy my company. I was pleased but baffled. We had no sooner finished our coffee than he called for a bill, paid it, and got up. "Well, I must be off," he said. We parted. I knew no more of what he was up to than before. I did not see him again.